Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war update extra video. I did a video giving you some opinions of certain Democrats who are really pro-Ukraine and nailing stuff yesterday. And I thought it's only fair that I get you some GOP, some American Republican politicians who think similarly, to give you that sense of balance, and also to give you the idea, and in fact Representative Lawler here is going to talk about this in a second, give you the sense that actually perhaps the voices in the Republican Party that are pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine are a small minority of voices, but they are just very outspoken, they're very loud, and often it's those that have minority opinions that shout the loudest about them, and that can give you an incorrect sense of, you know, how powerful that caucus might be. So I'm going to give you some Republican opinions here and do my interspersing of those interviews with my own commentary. It is just like 4 different videos of me talking about them as we go along, so take it for what it is, but hopefully it's of interest. What I try to do for you guys is spend literally my entire life compiling information, so you don't have to, and so you can just come and get some opinions, get a sense of what's going on from me, I guess, rather than spending your time sifting and searching. Anyway, this is, as I say, a Republican representative, Lawler. Now he's interesting. We're gonna pop into a little bit of his background as this video goes on, because I think that actually he's got some meaningful background that influences his opinions on Ukraine. But here he is, sewing it all together somewhere near the beginning, all of these conflicts, and having a greater understanding of the geopolitical landscape, I think, in the world, far greater than likes of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and her ilk that he is pitted against. There is this schism in the Republican Party, and it's just such a shame that there aren't enough of them prepared to go out on a limb and say, hang on, that's not right, that's not cool what she's saying. And I know, you see, the problem is there's a threat of being primaried, which is, if you're going to say something against Marjorie Taylor Greene, you are by extension probably saying something against the MAGA movement, and that is Trump. So if you're saying something against Trump, if you're going to be strong on Ukraine, it means you're actually going to be fairly anti-Trump, unless you are very delicate with what you say. So it's safer if you just keep quiet. People are looking after themselves rather than what's right. They are putting, politics before people, whereas we need to put morality, we need to put people first, on our individual sort of party politicking and self-preservation ideally come second.
Well, I think what you're seeing, frankly, on both sides are challenges. I think the Democrats have a major challenge on aid to Israel. We'll see how many of my Democratic colleagues support that. Obviously, we have had consternation within our conference on Ukraine. But as I've said repeatedly, when you look at what is happening around the globe, these things cannot be... I think what you're seeing, frankly, on both sides are challenges. I think the Democrats have a major challenge on aid to Israel. We'll see how many of my Democratic colleagues support that. Obviously, we have had consternation within our conference on Ukraine. But as I've said repeatedly, when you look at what is happening around the globe, these things cannot be taken up as silos. They have to be viewed in the context of the greater conflict. China is the biggest purchaser of Iranian petroleum. It's why I introduced the SHIP Act last year and passed it through the House. And finally, the Senate will be taking this bill up. It's why yesterday we passed the Iran-China Energy Act to go after the financial institutions in China which are facilitating this illicit oil trade.
And it's absolutely right. There needs to be an understanding that all of these things are connected. And we are playing 4-dimensional geopolitical chess. And so when the likes of MTG, Matt Gaetz, whoever, are like, yeah, Ukraine Nazis, it's just froth, it's just nonsense, conspiracy theory fluff. It's dangerous, though. It's super dangerous. But it's like, you just don't understand. You're just not clever enough, or you don't want to be clever enough, or you're not interested enough, or whatever it is. You really shouldn't have a seat at the table here, but you forced your seat to the table, and you are holding people hostage with a gun, diplomatically hostage, and as a result, you've been getting your way. But the serious politicians understand what's going on.
$88 billion in increased revenue to Iran since Joe Biden took office. These sanctions are critically important. You look at what is happening where Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror. It is using the funds from this illicit oil trade to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and now a direct assault on Israel. And as I've said repeatedly, my wife is from Moldova. Her family lives on the Ukraine border. I have no doubt if Ukraine...
And that's that bit of background. That's it. Why is Mike Lawler bucking the Republican trend? Why is he putting his head above the parapet? Why is he so confident in being strong on Ukraine? Wife's from Moldova, lives on the Ukrainian, family lives on the Ukrainian border. Right, I get it now.
It falls. These former Soviet satellite states will fall with it. And that is a calamity that none of us can afford in the United States or in Europe. And so,
Which in a sense, if I was to be super cynical, it'd be like, so you are putting yourself... Do you know what I mean? It's like you only make these big claims, you only realise the moral sense of it all when it affects you more. And I always think that's a little bit sad. Like, Ukraine doesn't affect me personally, as in it's come to affect me personally. I've become personally involved with Ukraine. But before the war started, I had no horse in the race. Personally, I had no personal connection to Ukraine. But so for me, it was all about the geopolitical understanding, the gross unfairness of it. But for a lot of politicians, it's just whatever little echo chamber they're living in and jumping on whatever conspiracy bandwagon. And someone that bucks a trend is because he has a horse in that race as well.
We must lead. And if we fail to lead in this moment, we will be viewed like Neville Chamberlain was in the lead up to World War II.
So Congressman, you're actually sounding like a conservative Republican, and I haven't heard that out of the House often on this issue.
He can say that. I mean, Joe Scarborough was a conservative Republican lawmaker, before he got into his present gig.
By the way, Wall Street Journal editorial pages consistently chided people inside your conference who have been pushing back on doing the very things you're talking about right now. Sometimes a sense of perspective.
This is such
needed.
A good question. I love that he asked this.
If you'd be kind enough to take us into the House conference, and I understand you have people that spout Vladimir Putin's talking points and Russian propaganda, but we also talk about the House Intel chair. We also talk about the House Foreign Affairs chair, McCall. Who have both been strong, fierce advocates for Ukraine from the start, and like you, they take what I consider at least to be a traditional conservative stance. I'm curious, inside the caucus, how big of a split is there? Are there 50%, 40%, 30% who are doing Vladimir Putin's bidding, spewing his talking points? Is it 5%? Do most Republicans support defending Ukraine against Russian aggression?
It is a significantly small number, but unfortunately a loud number.
The old small but loud. And hopefully that really is true. The word significantly there might do some heavy lifting. Significantly small. Does he mean it's a significant minority, which means actually it's a bigger minority than you might think? Or is it significantly small, as in it really is very small? And I think he means there significant minority, which means, it's less than 50%, but there are a few of them.
And I think what you have seen, with Chairman McCall's comments, Chairman Turner's comments, and what Speaker Johnson is saying, The Republican conference as a whole, the vast majority of members support.
Can I ask you, why is it taking
taking
the speaker so long? I mean, Ukrainians have been dying.
Good question.
What he said yesterday is what you've been saying all along. Why did it take him so long to get there?
Look, to be fair to the speaker, I think he walked into a very difficult situation, inherited a conference that obviously was broken, a lot of infighting, and we had a lot of things that needed to get, out the door, including the appropriations package. Obviously, if we want to provide aid to our allies, we need to be able to fund our own government. And so getting the appropriations work done was critically important. Getting FISA reauthorized last week, critically important. And now here we are with aid for our allies. I would have liked to have seen this done a lot sooner. Obviously, the House passed aid to Israel back in November of last year. So it is not that we have not moved legislation, but obviously there's been a lot of consternation. When you look at some of the challenges that we're facing across the globe, with all respect, I think Joe Biden has made several mistakes in the lead up to the conflict in the Middle East, including lifting some of the sanctions against Iran. Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror.
And then he goes to talk on Iran and has a bit of a dig there at Biden over Iran. But the idea here is that, he admits that he would like it to have been done earlier. And of course, he can't be seen to criticize fellow Republicans for it not being done earlier. But that really does, I think, lay at their feet. But he is someone who clearly feels strongly for Ukraine, has a Wall Street Journal column where he is advocating for Ukraine on a regular basis. That's really important in a media outlet like that. We're going to go to Mike Pence now, the former vice president, who is at present in Brussels advocating that the US moves away from an isolationist positioning to take center stage globally. But of course, you got to put your money where your mouth is in order to do that. I've talked previously about the whole idea that America is getting involved in places like Ukraine and spending money on foreign diplomacy is that you get a return on investment. So the isolationist critics like your MTG and the MAGA Republicans will be saying, well, we need to sort out our borders first. We need to spend money. America first. We need to spend money on America. And it's like, well, it's not either or. It's not that we can't spend a single penny out there until we spend. Otherwise, you just spend all your money ever on America internally and not anything out there. And if you do that, then of course you can't expect to get any benefit from the world if you're not investing in the world. And so there has to be this idea that you look after your own, as well as you can walk and chew gum, as well as investing out there so that you get a return on investment. Now, the US is culturally and politically, militarily, economically at the center of the world, right? The film industry, a lot of computer game industry, which is multi-billion dollar, bigger than the music industry, the computer game industry, IT industry, military, etc., ad infinitum. The US has an incredible power around the world that it is exporting to the world. But in order to continue getting the demand for your stuff coming from outside, you need to invest in outside. So the reason you export security and you're involved in NATO and you're playing the central role here, there and everywhere is that you're also managing trade deals on the back of that. You say, yeah, we'll support you if you do this. And then it turns out you end up buying our military equipment and you end up doing this and you end up buying it. And we have these contracts and our contractors go out there and do work out there. And so America is powerful and it's at the top of the hegemonic ladder because it's not just projecting itself, it's also investing in. So it's projecting itself onto the outside world, but investing in the outside world to get that return on investment. And of course, isolationism will cause people who say America first will end up then seeing America come last, because after generations of doing that, you will find out that you've created a vacuum in the world that will be filled by other power structures. Well, who will that be? Most likely China, with Russia tagging along. The EU will be trying to fight the battles of the US, but the EU is suffering with being undermined politically by the likes of Russia, etc., etc. And so this, people always terribly, it depends how you define globalism or internationalism. I'm all for internationalism. It's like, we can't just live in our own little place. We live in a globalized world now. I remember watching it was a genetic scientist on a documentary, or on a chat show, actually, sort of science chat show in the UK. And he was asked, what's the most important moment in time? And he said, the invention of the bicycle. I was like, well, that's a bit weird. The invention of the bicycle meant people used to stay in their villages, and you used to mate basically within your villages, and you stayed in your community. And very rarely did people move in the kind of way that we do now. The invention of the bicycle, people had individual freedom to move, like, a bit like horse, but it was that taking this to a new level. It's a technological advancement that started, and now we've got cargo ships and planes and this and that, and we are just spreading ourselves all around the world, and we live in an international global world, whether you like it or not. And that means we need to work together. If there's a pandemic that spreads because of that, then we need to work together to shut that down. If there's malware, if there's pollution, environmental catastrophe, we need to work together. I don't think there's a future for going complete isolationist. I just think it's not only completely impractical, but it's also counterproductive if you are trying to project yourself as a global superpower and remain as a supreme power as America. MAGA Americans will love to shout USA, 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 and that kind of like that brash pride that comes through. It's like, yeah, but to be great, you need to be interacting, and you need to be investing, and you need to be, otherwise you just become isolated and then taken advantage of. Now, over to Mike Pence here.
And that is, the situation in Ukraine is dire today. But the reality is that there's a gathering storm that I think our allies here in Europe recognize. That's why it's so heartening to me to see Speaker Mike Johnson and the Republican leadership moving forward on an aid bill. I think America's the leader of the free world, Jake. And I think it's important in this moment that we...
The reason I gave you all that spiel just now is if you want to be able to say America is the leader of the free world, you have that responsibility. It's not just a right. You don't just get to stand up and say, hey, we're the leader of the free world. You need to be projecting yourself as the leader and maintaining your position up there so that you can say, we're the leader of the free world. We stand for liberty and freedom, and that's what we also want to export around the world. We can talk about American imperialism on another day, but the idea is that you don't get to say that just by, it's not a birthright. It's something you have to work for and something you have to continually maintain.
Accept that responsibility, that we renew
support
for the Ukrainians who fought against this unprovoked and brutal invasion now for more than 2 years. Give them what they need to make the fight, because as I said here today and have said for many years, I have no doubt in my mind, having met Vladimir Putin, that if Putin were allowed to overrun Ukraine, it would not be long before he crossed the border of a NATO country where our men and women in uniform would be required to fight. So the situation is dire. Vladimir Putin continues to brutalize the people of Ukraine, literally fired a missile at a hotel that took dozens of lives and injured nearly 100 men, women, and children. Now is the time for America to lead, and I'm encouraged to see the Congress moving in that direction.
They are moving in that direction, but it's taking quite some time, and a lot of the protest against this bill is coming from the right wing of the Republican Party in the House. Some of Donald Trump's most stalwart supporters What do you say to them when they say not one more penny to Ukraine? What's your response?
Well, I say to them from my years of experience as vice president, from my years serving on the International Relations Committee in the House, that this is a real moment of testing for the United States, and we need to meet this moment. Because look, I understand the frustration with the failed policies of the Biden administration at home and abroad. I mean, literally the worst border crisis in American history.
And that's, I'm trying to be really positive for the GOP at the moment. Here, Jake Tapper offered him on a plate a way of saying, yeah, these guys suck and they really are wrong. But he's actually trying to say, here's the opportunity to stand up. Instead, he's saying, here's the opportunity to stand up and do what's right. And look, I understand they're really frustrated because Biden's a numpty and he's made all sorts of rubbish decisions. And so I would be as angry as them. And it's like, okay, so here's another opportunity to have a go at Biden rather than say these MAGA MTG and Paul Gosar and people like that, they are just wingnuts. I say that in a much more diplomatic way, but yeah, it's frustrating. They've still not got to a point where it's like calling these people out for like the stuff. I feel strongly about this because the stuff MTG has been saying for the last couple of days is bonkers. It is like full on grade A nut job bonkers.
History resulting from Joe Biden undoing all the policies we put into effect, record inflation over the last 3 years, and that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that undermined the credibility and the confidence of
I don't want to keep picking him up, but look, Americans have got hold of inflation better than most other countries on earth, right? The inflation was an American thing. It was a global economic thing due to an energy crisis, partly because of what Russia, or largely because of what Russia did, right? So that I would say is disingenuous.
Of the free world in American leadership. I think it all literally set the stage for the moment we're in today. Mm-hmm. And I would just say to my colleagues on Capitol Hill, my old friends, that now's a moment where the United States of America needs to square our shoulders. We need to recognize we are the leader of the free world. And we need to step into this moment and send a deafening message, not just to Russia and Vladimir Putin, Jake, but also renew our support to our cherished ally Israel, support Taiwan, and also send a very clear message to the mullahs in Tehran and, frankly, to President Xi in Beijing that America is going to stand firm for freedom.
You say isolationism is never the answer. That was the theme of your speech earlier today. The rhetoric of your former running mate, Donald Trump, has been a major driving factor in your party, the Republican Party's gradual shift toward a more isolationist view over the past 8 years. Maybe it's a minority view, but it's growing in power. And this helped create the climate for the foreign aid fight we're seeing today, which is also threatening Speaker Johnson's job. Now, you have famously split with Mr. Trump over both January 6th and his views on foreign aid. But I wonder if, as Trump's former vice president, if you ever feel that maybe you played any role in the erosion of the Reagan ideology that you stand for.
Well, first, let me not skip over the fact. I think Speaker Mike Johnson is in a tough spot. Look, it's a very narrow majority, and I think what the American people will witness here is nothing short of moral courage. Here, Speaker Mike Johnson has decided to do what he believes is right and trust the American people with the outcome in this moment, and I commend him for that. But as to your question, it's a fair question, but I would tell you, I honestly believe the emergence of this new Republican isolationism, I believe, is something that has come forth in the last 3 years, particularly with the disaster at our southern border.
And So the good thing here is he's recognizing the MAGA isolationism. So he recognizes that's a thing, and the implication is it's a negative thing, it's a problem. I recognize, but he tries to say it's only come along in the last 3 years, as if he doesn't understand its evolution from the Tea Party movement. He doesn't like the movement right through his own vice presidency and the Trump presidency to where it is now, and QAnon, the fact that it's so closely connected to wingback conspiracy theorizing is, I'm sorry, that is pretty disingenuous. But, you know, outside of that, like the general kind of Ukraine things he's saying are broadly correct, right?
Inflation and the Russian invasion into Ukraine. I think you have many Republicans that are falling back to the notion that we've got problems here at home. We can't solve every problem in the world, when the reality is that anyone that says that we can't secure our border, revive our economy, and be the leader of the free world's got a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. We've done both now for 75 years. We can do both again. And
absolutely bang on. And I love the way he says it's great. It's like, because you got, like, Mike Johnson has said this a couple of times. He said it several times in the same interview, saying we're the greatest nation on earth. And I know some people in my threads have been like taking the mickey out of that if they're not American, but a lot of Americans genuinely believe that. And then, you know, when you look at things like economics, and when you look at certain things, and like I was talking about, that cultural projection out into the world, you can argue that. You can make arguments for the US being the greatest or most successful whatever country in the world. I'm not saying that is the case, but you can make that case. If you are going to say that, to say we're the greatest country on earth, and then someone says, oh, can you do some border reforms and can you help Ukraine at the same time? And they say, oh, we can't do that. We've got to sort the border out first. We can't do anything until we sort the border out, and then we'll sort Ukraine. But actually, we can't do that until we've done this, and then we can't. Like, Mike Pence is absolutely right. It's like, if we say we're the greatest country on earth, I think we can probably sort our border out and help Ukraine. It's like, while the Second World War was going on, we were doing all sorts of stuff, including like helping out Europe with the Second World War and doing lots of domestic stuff. And then when we had the New Deal thing going on, we were also doing stuff internationally. It's like, it's ridiculous to think that you can't do both things. So well done,
in
Pence.
Our administration, I honestly
really
believe,
right.
Jake, that, you know, we built up our military. We stood with our allies, stood up to our enemies. We didn't go looking for foreign entanglements, but when the moment presented itself, whether it was a fight against ISIS, taking down Qasem Soleimani, cruise missiles into Syria, we were willing to use American force. And that's the opposite of isolationism. That's American leadership.
You have said that you're not endorsing Donald Trump. You also have not ruled out voting for him. Why not?
Okay, I don't want to go down that route, but I think generally there's some good stuff there from Pence, and then we're going to go to the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who is, I think, pretty much spot on with what he says. So this is Mike Turner. He's from Ohio. Interesting, and yeah, I generally like what he has to say, to be honest, in general. But I just don't think he's strong enough often in condemning others in his own party. It's like, or going directly against Trump in his advocacy. But he has, with McCall, he has called out how people on the House floor in his own party have been infected with Russian propaganda, and that is super important. Like, hats off to him for saying that. That is a big call.
Right. Well, we have to pass this Ukraine aid. It is at a critical time. Because of the delay that has occurred in getting this funding approved, Ukraine is running out of ammunition and inventory, and also there are additional advanced.
The House floor so you can have a vote.
Right. Well, we have to pass this Ukraine aid. It is at a critical time. Because of the delay that has occurred in getting this funding approved, Ukraine is running out of ammunition and inventory, and also there are additional advanced weapon systems that they need that I believe the administration may soon approve that would be part of this package that would give them a real edge to be able to, hopefully push Russia back and, repel their aggression. What's interesting about what you just said on the House floor, I mean, we really need to change the rule that is really left over that allows for one member to call for vacating the chair of the Speaker. The Speaker has shown...
He's absolutely right there. So he said it's left over, these kind of vague statements. I'm fairly sure that was the bartered agreement with getting Speaker Kevin McCarthy elected back in, even though he was eventually kicked back out. But he had to do some compromises, one of which is only what you can have one person move to vacate you. And he agreed to have that change. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, so that's not a leftover thing. That is literally what was agreed by Kevin McCarthy, the previous Speaker, just before Speaker Mike Johnson. So, yeah.
Incredible courage in bringing this package to the floor. And what has happened, where the Speaker's position used to have power and authority, is that now you have the bully caucus who believes that each one of them can bully or to threaten the Speaker.
So this is great from Mike Turner for several reasons. One, again, you concentrate on what words mean things. And you could listen to this and just, yeah, okay. He just said a bunch of stuff I broadly agree with. But some of those words mean a lot more. So incredible courage. It's not incredible courage to just present a bill to the floor unless your job really is properly on the line. In other words, this is Mike Turner saying those people are really, really giving Mike Johnson a hard time. There's genuinely a group of MAGA Republicans who are properly holding a gun to Mike Johnson's head, metaphorically. And hats off to him for actually coming up and getting this done. And that's kind of why it's taken 7 months and so on and so forth. And then he calls them a bully caucus as well, who are doing things, wielding power that is greater than the number of people that they really are. So they get to shout loudest and also have seemingly more power than an equivalent number of people who aren't doing those kind of things. It goes back to Adam Kinzinger's analogy with a hand grenade. Everyone's got the same amount of power. The hand grenade's in the middle of the room. As soon as one person picks up that hand grenade, has their hands on the pin, then they have all the power. And MTG at the moment, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is that person with a hand grenade.
That needs to stop. We need to get back to professionalism. We need to get back to governing. We need to get back to legislating. And
So, sorry to keep stopping, but that means that one, those MAGA Republicans aren't professional. Two, they are not governing. I mean, this is a really heavy indictment. You remember what he's saying is it's not that the Democrats are not. The Democrats want these bills to the floor. They're not the ones that have kept it back. So who has kept that? These people. So it's like they've given Mike Johnson a hard time. They are a bully caucus. They're not governing and they're not professional. And we need to get back to being, professional, etc., etc.
We need to get back to professionalism. We need to get back to governing. We need to get back to legislating. And this rule needs to be changed.
And the House Rules Committee, which has to report this out, and they are the gatekeepers, and they've got some pretty hardline members. Do you think it can get out of House rules?
I think there's bipartisan support for this rule change. And this type of physical bullying, not just legislative bullying, is a great example. We need the Speaker to be free from this type of threat, and so that he can do the right thing and serve the American people. And he's certainly showing a tremendous amount of courage.
And what about the fact that President Trump...
Sorry, and he keeps repeating he's showing a tremendous amount of courage. This shows how dysfunctional the place is, that Mike Johnson is having to go this far to just do what's normally expected, and that shouldn't be shouldn't be hyper partisan. Like, he's presenting a bill that's for the benefit of the national security of the US, concerning a conflict that the US is involved in, involving the US's arch nemesis Russia, and indeed China. Everyone should be on the same page here. But the fact that Mike Johnson has to show incredible courage to put these bills to the floor is a representation of how dysfunctional it is.
Former President Trump has been, very negative about the Ukraine aid, wants it to be alone. There can be some arguments for that. But they've been arguing for it to be done through the repo of taking Russian assets. But there's only $3 billion under U.S. control in Russian assets. The G7,
which is what she said to Nancy Pelosi the other night.
Talking about doing that in June or addressing it in June. But most of that Russian money is frozen and it's, for some reason, beyond my ken, it's in Belgium. And there's more of it in Japan. It's not the $61 billion that is going to provide the particular weapons that you just said are so important to Ukraine right now. Air defenses that we can provide.
You're absolutely right. And we're seeing every day that Ukrainians are dying because of Russian shelling and the need for air defense in Ukraine.
That's the right rhetoric.
And as you are aware, a good chunk of this money goes to replenish U.S. stocks. If you actually break down the portion that Ukraine is getting, it's not it's a smaller portion overall of the amount of money that's being approved. And even so, the United States has contributed less than half of all aid, military and humanitarian.
He goes on to talk about this in more detail in a second when she asks him the next question, which I talked about earlier. I showed you this earlier, this part. But it's really important that not only does he say that US is not providing as much as the EU and Europe, because that corrects disinformation. But it's also to say that it's not the whole package that goes to Ukraine. So when you're talking about $60 billion, and this is the what really irritates me about Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's like, why are we sending $60 billion to Ukraine? Well, actually, most of that money is going to go to the US in terms of ordering new equipment from the US to replenish DoD stocks, it will be the cost of that equipment to go to Ukraine, which will then be replenished. It's about investing in the US. So it's not $60 billion going to Ukraine at all. And he very clearly said that.
To Ukraine. We need to step up the plate. It's part of the morale that Ukraine needs. We need to stand up to Putin. Putin needs to know that the United States is not going to walk away. This is a fight between authoritarianism and democracy, and we need to be on the side of democracy.
And another thing Mr. Trump said, I think on Friday, was that the U.S. should not do anything until Europe does something. Well, Europe did $54 billion this year already.
Right. Again, we're less than half.
They're doing anything.
Yeah, we're less than half of overall aid. The EU, collective nations, have contributed more overall than the United States has overall.
I want to ask you about what you said in the last couple of days or a week ago, perhaps, about how some of the House Republicans, wittingly or not, are repeating Russian propaganda against Ukraine, false charges against so-called corruption in Ukraine and other things that are completely unproved, but it's coming right from the Russia propaganda machine and it's ending up on the House floor. And what can you as the intelligence chair or your colleagues do about that?
Right, so we're trying to get into the hands of my fellow members of Congress information that they could understand what real threat Russia is. I mean, it's also pro-Russian propaganda that, we need to be able to clearly identify Russia's an adversary. Their weapons are pointed at us. They continue to field new weapon systems, including new nuclear weapon systems. They continue to hack into the United States. We continue to see threats to our infrastructure.
And I'm really glad that and I think more people need to talk about this right across the political spectrum in US politics, is the threat that Russia is posing to the US, not potentially, but in actuality. The cyber attacks in taking out US utilities or attempting to do that. I think he's really on point here.
As a result of Russians' nefarious actions, we need to be able to stand up and clearly say Russia is an adversary. We're not going to allow them as an aggressor.
Yes, exactly that. Stand up and say these guys are the bad guys. Officially, I, as a Republican lawmaker, am going to stand up and say we are being attacked by Russia. We are being attacked in our own country by Russia. They are the bad guys, not this kind of nonsense stuff that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene come up with and essentially lie in barrages of lies.
to continue to kill and threaten a standing democracy in Europe that will, if they were permitted, cascade and threaten other nations in Europe.
And when we met last in February in Munich at the security conference, that weekend, President Zelensky was saying we could lose this war. We could have to keep retreating. Advika was lost that weekend.
Sorry.
Navalny was killed that Friday of that weekend when we were there in Munich. So many events were happening. And it was a very downbeat meeting of the European leaders and of the U.S. Right now, it's gotten a lot worse. Kherson has been attacked. There have been continued retreats. They really are in trouble.
They are, and this is winnable by them. And two things need to happen for the shift. One, they need our aid so that they have sufficient weapon stocks to be able to defend themselves and to fight. And they're the ones who are doing the fighting, and admirably and honorably. And then secondly, they need long-range weapon systems. They need to be able to hold Crimea at risk and the Russian supply lines and push back
the so-called
front lines. The 300-kilometer ATACMS long range. As they're being attacked with drones and missiles from Crimea, they need to be able to take out those weapon systems to keep their own people safe.
I want to ask you about Israel because Israel's war cabinet.
And we'll leave it there because he goes on to talk about Israel. But I think that is really good rationale from him and really good rhetoric. So totally impressed with him in the main. We're now going to go to the Conservative podcast, the Bulwark podcast with Tim Miller again. He is a never Trumper now. He's Conservative, but not a fan of Donald Trump. And here these two talk about Mike Johnson, and this isn't necessarily to do with Ukraine. So it is by extension what Johnson has done, and they talk about whether he genuinely believes that. But there's also some really interesting discussion about Mike Johnson's positioning here, and then whether he will be weakened or strengthened by doing work with the Democrats. I think this is the whole thing is an interesting video to watch, but this section particularly so.
I'd seen a single Mike Johnson speech, or it wasn't even really a speech. I'd seen a single thing of Mike Johnson. I was like, that's a weird character. Anyway.
So remember who was right before Mike Johnson? It was like Jim Jordan was right before that, right? Yeah. And so Jim Jordan couldn't quite get there, and then we ended up with Mike Johnson. That turned out to be pretty consequential because Jim Jordan is basically an isolationist, and Mike Johnson is a Reagan Republican.
Pretending to be an isolationist. Pretended for a little while.
Yeah, but his heart is there. The way he talks about, like, if we don't stop Putin, he's going through the rest of Europe. And, anyway.
Which I think is fascinating. So, who is Mike Johnson? He is a Christian nationalist, but he's also been this MAGA Republican. But I think he's not like a QAnon conspiracy theory MAGA Republican. I think he's aligned with some of their, top of the agenda positions, such as on abortion. He's pro-life in that MAGA way, but probably because of his stalwart Christianity. And so, although he's been in that MAGA train, he's probably not all in on it in hindsight. I'm coming to understand his positioning a little bit more. Like, he does say he's a Reagan Republican, and you can tell, as they're just about to say, you can tell there are elements of that with the way he understands the importance of national security, and he listens and believes the intelligence agencies of his country, and he's not willing to go all in on conspiracy theorizing nonsense.
Wait. So we have somebody.
Every once in a while, it'll sound like Kinzinger or Bill Kristol or something, and then all of a sudden he reverts. I don't know. It's very strange, but you can tell it's in there. There's like a little hint of something. There's a little hint of Reagan in there somewhere.
Yeah. So I think that was historically could turn out to be an important moment. Then the next question, of course, is he willing to fall on his sword? Is he willing to die for this? And he's got the whole Christian thing going on, like. This is all about what's right and wrong. And look, when he gets to stuff like anti-gay, you're like, the Christian stuff doesn't really help there. No. But when he believes that the right thing to do is to, save Ukraine, he's the kind of guy who seems willing to like take a sacrifice for that. And he talks about that was so weird yesterday. He talked about his place in history. And we'd like members of Congress, we'd like speakers to think that way, wouldn't we? Like, I'm going to do the right thing. Like this bill, getting this passed, saving this country, stopping this aggression is more important than my job. We'd love for members of Congress to think that way. And God bless him, Mike Johnson seems to be doing that.
Maybe there's a Mike Pence element of this. Again, like it's like plenty to criticize. So please, this is not hagiography, and it's 6 months late. But go back to that line I read to Hallie. I can make a selfish decision and do something that's different, but I'm doing here what I believe to be the right thing. Now that could be it could be bluster, right? It could be fake moralizing. There's plenty of people that do fake moralizing. But if it turns out that he really jams this thing through with Democrats and faces potentially getting overthrown in his speakership, also, and conceivably it could end up making him more powerful also, right? Because like, let's say he jams it through and these guys fail in their motion to vacate, which I think is which is also possible. He could end up coming out of this. It's sort of like, why don't more people try this? This is one of my biggest frustrations the last 9 years. If he follows through on this, there seem like some pretty big upsides, both for policy and politics and his eternal soul, all across the board, it feels.
They're going to talk a really interesting little segment coming. But the idea that it can make him stronger, I was listening to another analysis today where they were saying that if he gets that Democrat support, it means he looks like he's willing to govern, to do bipartisan interaction and governance. And that will play well for those more, and I know establishment Republicans is not how like MAGA likes to see them. They're dead against that deep state establishment, blah, blah, blah. But I mean that in the general sense of like, traditional Republicans who've been around a lot longer. They'll be like, okay, Mike Johnson, right, we'll get behind him. And then Democrats will be like, okay, the idea that the analyst was saying earlier was it's the better the devil we know. Interesting saying that about Moses Johnson. But like, we know Mike Johnson, we know where he's coming from. We might not agree with him on an awful lot of stuff, but we recognize he's willing to work in a bipartisan way. And if we get rid of him, if we Democrats go along with these MAGA Republicans to vacate the speaker, then the likelihood is we're going to get someone that's even more batshit crazy. And if that's the case, then we won't be able to work at all. There will be no more passing any bills in a bipartisan manner. So actually, Mike Johnson is probably a safe bet for the Democrats to keep in as Speaker. And that then makes Mike Johnson more powerful. So these bills could end up being passed with a bipartisan majority, a strengthening of bipartisan work in Mike Johnson's position, and actually force the MAGA Republicans, I'm not too sure about this last part, but those MAGA Republicans could then be forced to admit that their positioning is counterproductive and not as powerful, not as popular as they might have previously thought.
Like it could be working for
him. Let me pull on that eternal soul theme for a minute. People who believe this, people who believe that they're part of some large thing, God's plan or whatever, and like they can be appealed to do this large thing that ends their career because they believe it's going to last into eternity. Like did they do the right thing in the story, like a biblical character, right? If Mike Johnson sees himself that way, that's good.
Does.
And speaking for myself, I can't speak for you on this, but maybe you would agree with me. I think it's really important for those of us who want conversions. Like you were for Trump, now you like Chris Christie. At the end of Chris Christie's career, he does the right thing. He turns.
Did you have to pick
Trump.
Chris Christie as the example? I'm with you. I think I'm going to agree with you, but you picked an example that's going to make it really hard for me. But go ahead. Finish
Good. We should make it hard to test the proposition. We should make it. Good. We should let people be remembered for the last thing they did, if it was the right.
Just a bit of geekery aside here. There's something called a reductio ad absurdum, which is you reduce something to its most absurd example, and you do that because if that's so egregious, but the logic still works, then the logic definitely works. If it definitely works, if the logic works in this most incredibly dislikable situation, then we can apply that logic right across here. You want to take it to the extreme to test out the logic, and that's what he's referring really to a reductio there, reductio ad absurdum. I like that
thing, and I understand all of what Chris Christie did going into this, but so if Mike Johnson, ends his career as speaker by getting the money to Ukraine and at least preventing them from collapsing, which seems to be what's going on in a lot of the front over there. God bless him. And I'm willing to forgive and not forget, but to forgive a lot of what he did before that. And I want to incentivize that. I want the people who come after Mike Johnson to say, you know, I may have been a cynical character here and there in my career, but here is a great way to go out. And instead of like the Kevin McCarthy character where you're always conniving to stay in power, have people be willing to say, this bill, this thing I'm going to do right now, probably will cost me my career, might cost me my career, but it doesn't end the history of me. It makes the history of me. It is the headline in the history of me. I did the right thing.
And I think that's fascinating stuff. And in fact, in this other analysis I was watching, there was talk about how the House has become so partisan now that it's difficult to see it really ever working together in a way it maybe did 20, 30 years ago. There were some people referencing those in the know who are working. They're saying that staffers are now leaving. It's not just that you've had Ken Buck and Mike Gallagher leaving and resigning because they can't handle how it's so dysfunctional. And there is thought that there could be others on the way too, but that hasn't happened yet. Maybe because it's all about these bills and whether they get through. But apparently there's been a bit of an exodus of staffers who are like, this is worse than it's ever been. I can't handle working this. I'm going to get out of this job. And that is a reflection of this hyper-partisan scenario where people are just not prepared to work together. That it's like, it was a claim that we heard that they were discussing on another Bulwark episode where it was one of the, I forget his name, Graves. It was a representative Graves is saying, look, we can't pass this Israel package because it's Biden. We can't pass this Ukraine package because it's Biden. We can't pass this Iran TikTok package because it's Biden. It's like, in other words, you can't ever pass anything. Like if you think everything is that the other side wants is bad because the other side want it, then you can't understand that both sides could want the same thing for the betterment of the US. And it means that you can't govern like that. You can't see literally everything that the other side promotes or that the president wants as being prima facie wrong just because. That is hyperpartisanship and that is destructive. And so you could get a situation where these bills go through and it could be the start of a bit of a healing that needs to take place for Congress, for the House of Representatives. I think the Senate's in a slightly different position. But anyway, Mike Johnson could come out a little bit stronger from this. And do you know what? If these bills do pass, it is 7 months too late, and he does suck for that. Like, he could have done this good stuff now. He could have done this 7 months ago. And I don't think you would have had the growth and this, like I keep saying, metastasizing of this MAGA cancer that has happened in 7 months. It's got worse, and actually, it probably would have been easier for him to have tabled the Senate bill in February or done whatever 7 months ago, and he wouldn't have had his job so much on the line as it is right now. Nonetheless, he could come out stronger. Let me know what you think. Anyway, that's enough from me. You take care, guys. Speak to you soon.